CeedCap essentially is a startup studio that focuses on backing, African founders towards launching successful tech companies. And we do this by providing early stage funding and also the operational improvement that they need to build this company. And one of the series of initiatives that we currently run is the CeedCap Build, which is a series of conversation with founders, investors, and the startup enabler ecosystem, where they get to share their knowledge and insight that has been, very useful to them on their journey to build companies. And also, we do this because we believe that as a startup studio, we need to be able to transfer knowledge to the next generation of venture builders, to be able to take those consolidated knowledge that a lot of experienced people have been able to accumulate and sort of use that to accelerate the companies that they are building. Every other Friday, we talk about different topics with experience and experts within the ecosystem, around conversation that they are, one, super passionate about, and two, that we consider really a very important pain point for entrepreneur and building startups. So, today we have someone very interesting in our midst. Is someone that I look up to because I look at how much of things he's been able to do within a short period of time, particularly because he's a great host. One thing I enjoy about talking to Patrick is that all the different times that we had to engage, is super excited about, helping entrepreneurs, helping founders, not just by saying it, but also by the action that, the community in which he represents and the community in which he works in is doing actively to support a lot of venture builders, founders, and entrepreneurs. And given that just a couple of weeks ago, we sort of marked the mental health day. And as builders ourselves, we know that it's not easy to build companies. And we also recognize the struggles that entrepreneurs go through in building new companies, or even building a team, or even ensuring that things are very structured. It's a very difficult thing building a company, even without any economical or social challenges. And this year, if there's anything we've learned, is that COVID-19 has sort of displaced a lot of us in changing our strategy, changing how we look at the world in general. And we also understand the impact that has on the mental health of founders and entrepreneurs. And so today we thought it would make sense for us to host a session that not only talk about, the wellness of founders, but also addressing the issues of mental health in venture building. And I think the guest that we have in our midst today is particularly designed for such conversation, not only because he's a professional in that space, but also is actively involved in enabling entrepreneurs. And so today we have in our midst Pat Riley. A bit of introduction of who Pat is. Pat is the CEO of GAN. GAN is the Global Accelerator Network, which is a highly curated community of independent accelerators and corporates and investors. GAN connects startups to human and financial resources that is needed for an entrepreneur within the cities that they operate to increase their ability to succeed and scale. Also, Pat is the managing partner of GAN Ventures, which is the VC fund associated with GAN. He started his career at the American Red Cross, where he oversaw the COO's office as the chief of staff. Pat left the Red Cross to manage sales and operation for venture-backed healthcare startups, which recently exited the startup space. Following his passion and support for startup companies around the world, Pat joined Techstars and also helped them in the very early stage to become the tech accelerator that supports hundreds and thousands of startups across the world. and he's very passionate about spending time with his wife and two girls, and bike riding, traveling, skiing, around Colorado. This is interesting because a couple of days ago, when I had a conversation with Pat, I think you were walking. You were having your morning walks about this time. So it's such a pleasure for us to be grabbing you at the time where you do go on your early morning walks. But without wasting so much of our time, today we have Pat, who will be walking us through building in tough times, right? And how important it is for us to pay attention to founders' mental health, and not just founders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and their well-being. And before Pat jumps right into it, I would like to give a sort of introduction on, the statistics in terms of data that we have to say why this is an important conversation. I'm sure many of you know this, but for as many that do not know this, one, founders are twice as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to have, ADHD, 3 times more likely to struggle with substance abuse, 11 times more likely to suffer from bipolar disorder, twice as likely to have a psychiatric hospitalization issue, and then twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts. This for us is a big issue for people who are trying to change the world, to have this series of data that is backing up, how they respond to mental health issues. It's a very interesting perspective for us to look at. And I'm sure Pat will be sharing a different angles and conversations around this. So please open your mind to, the perspective that is going to be bringing around this conversation, especially in the areas to which it affects founders and entrepreneurs and everyone really who is trying to build something. So Pat, thank you so much for making the time out, and please take the stage.
Yes.
So just a bit of house rules. Please feel free to put your question in the comment section. We will be taking those questions subsequently during Pat's discussion, and I'm sure we'll be able to make our time to answer some of your questions towards the end of the conversation. So thank you, Pat. Over to you.
Cool. Cass, what an amazing introduction. Thank you for that. And I just need everyone on the line to do 2 things today. Actually, 3 things today. One is, to Cass's point, come with an open mind. 2, I'm going to be asking you some questions. So I'd love for you to get a notebook. You're not going to have to share anything with anybody else on the line, but get a notebook if you can to write a few things down. And number 3, if you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat window, because we're going to have time at the end for us to talk. I'm going to talk for no more than about 20 minutes. And then Cass is going to ask me a few questions, and then I'd love for you all to ask me questions as well. But know that I'm not planning to talk for the next 50 minutes. No one will like that. So with that, let's get started. So I'll just very quickly, as an introduction, say, I started off university studying business. And I, as I was doing this, the freshman year, I took my first class in something called interpersonal communications, which is the study of how humans interact with each other, and realized that this was my life's calling, to go from being a business major actually to switch over and become an interpersonal communications major. And then along with that, I picked up a social psychology degree. With the goal of actually becoming a clinical psychologist. So all my training is actually in clinical psychology, which is, and my parents thought, were very, very upset that I was going to go do that. But long story short, I now have this fun job, which is I'm a venture capitalist. I run a network of accelerators and startup studios and corporate innovators around the world, but also to have this funny education about trying to be a clinical psychologist. So it's with that today that I am so excited to share this talk with you today. I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll go from here. So what we're going to be talking about today is this idea of what we call the whole founder. And as you think about this idea of the whole founder, I define it as this. It's a founder that has all the resources and knowledge that you need and want to become who you were born to be. That's frankly my goal for every single one of you on the line today, is that each of you would have all the resources, and all the knowledge you need and want to become who you were born to be. And I frankly think this is like such a great point. Like Kes brought up these great things, right? About how so many of us struggle with anxiety and depression. But I actually even think that there's another thing going on, which is that if you think about why teams fail, these are the reasons that Crunchbase gives for why teams fail. It's not the right team. People lose focus. Teams start fighting, or you lose passion, right? It's all these things that sort of get you to a place where you're not operating at your full potential. And just to take this one step further, 66% of the reasons that startups fail are typically due to soft behavior related issues. 66% of the reasons startups fail. And I'd say, like, as I've done my own research, talked to other experts, what we realize is there's really two things that we see startups dealing with the most that are leading to them having these things we just saw here, which is not the right team, or losing focus, or having disharmony, or lose focus. And it's this: you see teams and particularly founders dealing with two particular things over and over and over again. And it's, number one, an intense amount of anxiety. And we define it as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an event or something with an uncertain outcome. Or you see them really struggling with depression. This is repeated thoughts or feelings that have we call it characterized by a persistent depressed mood or a loss of interest in activities where you can't operate in daily life. So just to say this a little more simply, many founders we work with are anxious, and many founders that we work with are depressed for a lot of the reasons we're going to dig into today. And just to even take this one step further, just so you know, they're friends. Usually anxious people are depressed, and many times depressed people are anxious. So they go hand in hand. But to Kes's point, I just want to show this to you. This is what this chart is showing you. This is a chart done by Berkeley, Stanford, and University of California, San Francisco, showing you the mental health conditions among entrepreneurs compared to non-entrepreneurs. 49% of entrepreneurs have reported some sort of mental health condition compared to a comparison group. Depression is usually prevalent in 30% of founders compared to 15% of the general population. ADHD, 29% of founders have attention deficit disorder compared to 5% of the general population. We see an equal amount of anxiety in both audiences, but 12% of founders report some sort of substance abuse compared to 4% of the population, and bipolar disorder, 11% say they have it as founders, or 1% of the population says they have it. So we're dealing with founders that very much have the odds stacked against them. Like, right, if you think about how hard it is operating with depression, how hard it is operating with some sort of like bipolar disorder, it's very, very difficult. So what we're going to dive into today is a little more of this, and just go, if you are a founder, most likely you're going to struggle with depression or anxiety. So what do you do? And how do you actually face this and come to terms with it on a daily basis? So, and I'll just say this, I wanted to start off just saying, like, but there's hope. I think one of the reasons I wanted to become a clinical psychologist was because of just my own journey dealing with anxiety and depression. For most of my life, I have been an anxious person. I have struggled with depression, but I would say one of the most amazing things that has come out of this is this point here. It's that I now look at anxiety and depression as frankly a gift. Anxiety and depression are actually always telling us something. And I think with everything I sort of said so far, we're actually talking about anxiety and depression as negative things we don't want, things we sort of going, oh, they're going to hurt us. But I actually believe, then this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, is going, anxiety and depression are a gift that are always telling us something. And here's what I mean. As we dig into this too, we're going to sort of take this in two different ways as we unpack this. One is a short-term view of anxiety and depression, and then secondly, a long-term view of how we should deal with anxiety and depression. So let's take a look at this, like the short-term view for a minute. So if we believe that anxiety and depression are a gift and that they're always telling us something, how do we actually begin to understand like what they're actually telling us? What anxiety and depression are actually informing us? And this is where I've sort of this comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, But it's this idea of going, if you're actually going to understand what anxiety and depression are telling you, you have to do these three things. You have to recognize it, you have to embrace it, and you have to work through it. And let's unpack this a little bit more. So when you sort of feel anxious out in the world, what I first tell founders to do is go like, let's just first of all recognize that it's happening. Like, think about your body for a second. This is where I'm asking maybe you sort of like start writing down this a little bit more. But when you sort of have like, the first thing I always do is like go like, what is happening in your body that's showing you that you're being anxious? Like for me, my hands get a little like, my hands sort of get watery, right? I start sitting like this a little more, like with my hands crossed like this. I feel pressure in my chest, right? And all of a sudden it's telling me, like my body's immediately going, hey, Pat, you're getting anxious. You're getting anxious, right? And no, but I think the first thing is going, like, just recognize that actually anxiety is happening. But I think the second thing though is as you have anxiety, I think for a lot of people, they go, I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it, right? Get this away from me. I don't need this around me. This is horrible. It's going to hurt me. But I think what I realized is the more that I go, oh, my anxiety is real and helpful information, I actually sort of like, it doesn't have this power over me that it would if I was sort of shoving it away. So when I go to this thing where I'm going, oh, when I recognize it and go, oh, I'm getting sweaty palms, I'm feeling pressure in my chest, I'm starting to sit like this. Like what I'm doing then is going, okay, after I've done that, I'm going, okay, this is anxiety. This is anxiety. And my body is actually telling me that there's a real threat to me that I need to be aware of. And at this point, what I normally do is I usually stop. And Reagan is on the line. She'll hear me do this sometimes on the phone. I'll just sort of stop and I'll just breathe. Take a big breath in and a big breath out. In through my nose and out through my mouth. And what it's effectively doing is it's literally resetting my brain. And my point is going like, if we're going to deal with anxiety as it's happening, there's no other way that I have found to work through it than going, this is real, this is happening, and just breathing. Because it is, it's happening. And I go, but the breathing allows you to sort of calm yourself down and realize you're going to be okay. But I think the second part, the final thing around this, and this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, is going, there's always a message. There's always a message that the anxiety is telling us. And it's really, really important to understand what the message is at that very moment. And as we talk more about this today, what you're going to realize is that there are short-term messages that it's telling us and that there are long-term messages that it's telling us. And I'll give you an example here. In this short-term example, like today, for instance, I'm starting this call a touch anxious. I start most calls with founders a touch anxious. Why? Because my body is literally telling me, number one, it's going, so as I started the call today, Kes goes, Pat, over to you. At that moment, my palms are getting sweaty. I feel a little bit of pressure in my chest, right? I'm sort of going like, okay, I'm so like get a little more inward. And why, but I'm going like, but what, as I'm then, but I'm going, I'm recognizing it, then I'm embracing going, hey, Pat, like you're feeling anxiety. You're feeling anxiety. And if, I don't know if any of you saw this on the line, literally as he handed off, I literally did a big breath in and I let it out. And I was like, Kes, thank you. And at this moment of going, okay, here we go. But the message it was telling me was going, Pat, this is important. This is important. It's important that you show up well today. And literally the anxiety was getting my body ready to do this conversation. It wasn't doing anything bad. It wasn't sort of making me become someone where I was like telling myself I was a failure. My body was literally telling me something, hey, get ready for this talk you're about to give today. But here's what I would say I find interesting. When you sort of hear those messages, there are many times where it's telling you very, very good information. Pat, get ready for this talk today. It's important that you do a good job. That's a true thing. But I would say this though, there are also, I found 6 core thoughts that are negative thoughts that are at the root of many, many anxious thoughts that we have. And what we're going to spend the last part of the conversation on today is dig into these more. But I would say this, there are many, many times where we get anxious because we are looking at, these are six core thoughts that we're having that are telling us that we should be anxious because one of these things is about to happen. And these core thoughts are this. Like, number one, I'm helpless. Number two, I'm not good enough. Number three, I don't matter. Number four, I'm unlovable. Number five, I'm a fraud. And number six, I'm not safe. These core thoughts, just said another way, are ones where I could have started today's conversation with my anxiety and gone like, these examples today, Kes could have handed off and gone, you know what? I don't feel like I'm capable. I don't feel like I'm smart enough to be doing this. I don't feel like I've got the credentials to go do this. And I'm getting anxious because I feel like I'm a fraud. That is one reason that many people have anxiety. They're selling to investors, and they're going to the investors and going, hey, I've got this company, and I've got this I've got this company that I believe is, I think is okay, but frankly, I don't really know if we're going to be successful in the long run. Like, I'm a fraud. Or another one is like, I'm getting up in front of you today going, maybe I'm not a good enough speaker, and I'm worried about that. But I would say, what's important is, going back here for a second, less about this idea. Let me back this up for a second. My apologies. It was less about this idea of going, but if we're gonna deal with your anxiety on a short term, it's really important that you, number one, just recognize that it's happening. Number two, go, I know that this is here. I see you, anxiety. And number three, go, what is the message? Is it telling me to get ready? Is it telling me to sort of get excited? Is it telling me this is important? Or is it doing things where it's telling me, hey, you're helpless, or you're not good enough, or you don't matter, or you're unlovable, or you're a fraud, or you're not safe? And I think knowing that will allow you to understand what's really, really driving your anxiety in that very moment. So, but here's the deal. That's short term. That's like, you're about to go into an investor presentation. You need to be ready to go. You need to kind of know what your anxiety is telling you. But I would say the more important thing that we're going to talk about today is this idea of going, there are repetitive, anxious thoughts that lead us to become depressed. And these anxious thoughts may be things that are so ingrained in us. And how do we actually work through them to become people who know who they want to become and have everything that they need so that they can go operate one of the best companies in the world? So here's what I would say. If we're actually going to dig into become people who are whole people, who use our anxiety well, the first thing we need to do is this. Like, number one, get away and process your anxiety. What I mean is this. This is what you're looking at here is a picture of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, here in the States. A group of my college friends from university, went to Philadelphia to go and serve a bunch of homeless people. They literally have a house in the middle of the city, and every day they go out and they serve people underneath this bridge in Philadelphia. It's a really, really incredible organization. But when you go into their house, here's the towel that's on their house, in their kitchen. It says, everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes. Said another way, everyone in the house wants to be out here doing this stuff, serving the homeless. No one wants to be out here doing the dishes. And I think for most of us on the line, I would say, for so much of our lives, we are out there in the world, loving on our families, loving on our companies, building our companies, working with investors, being out in the community, doing all these things. Like Kes and I were talking about all the sort of protests that are happening right around you all right now. Like, so much of our energy is being devoted out there that I find so many of us aren't sitting at home doing the dishes, taking care of ourselves. Where I find founders typically are out there, we're not here. And I'd say, for me personally, I find so much of my time and energy is going, how do I love my family? Or how do I love my team? Instead of me just going how do I take care of myself? And I'd say, if you are going to be successful as a founder, it is vitally important that you do something where you take care of yourself first. It's the classic airline example. Put on your mask first, do this work first, and then you're going to be so much more capable to focus on others. Because if we're going to be honest, as a VC, I need you to focus on yourself first before you go take care of your family. I think your colleagues need you to be a whole person, or else you're going to operate out of deficiency. Your family needs you to focus on you, or else you're going to come home and not have energy to take care of like the kids or your spouse. So I would just say over and over again, it's before we even begin to this work, let's just take a moment and go, it is important for you to recognize that you need to take care of yourself. And not only is it the right thing to do, it's the thing to do that's in the long run going to help you have a more successful company, successful family, just because you took care of yourself. So here's the thing. This is probably the most important slide I will share with you today. It's the realization that your values drive your thoughts, which drive your emotions, which drive your behavior. Your values drive your thoughts, which drive your emotions, which drive your behavior. This is a picture of me at my favorite football game, American football game. It's the University of Oklahoma. We were playing our arch rival, Texas. We were down 41-20. And in the last few minutes, we came back and tied it 41-41. This is a picture of me being absolutely thrilled that we tied it up with our arch rival. Like I'm so, like, literally one of the happiest moments of my life. The thing though about this is, if you look at this, what you realize here is like what's happening. I have a value of celebration and a value of loving University of Oklahoma football, which led to a thought of me going, I cannot believe that we just came back down 21 points and are now equal with Texas, which drove this emotion, right? Me like literally feeling inside this like excitement of me going, this is amazing, which then led to me looking like this. In so much of our lives, even outside of moments like this, all of our values drive our behaviors. All of our values drive our behaviors. If I am someone who cares deeply about making money, all my behavior will show up in ways where I don't care about others and where I will sort of I will use people as an asset to get what I need. If my value is only being nice to other people, right? Let me phrase it another way. If a value of mine is being liked, then I'm going to spend most of my time and energy just being really nice to people, not telling anybody anything hard, right? It will drive this behavior where I'm like a pushover. My point is, like, if we have to start realizing going that like our values as humans will drive our behavior. So if that's the case, then we on the line have to spend so much of our time and energy doing this. And it's understanding our values. So let's go back to this for a second, right? We realize on our short term, how do we handle our anxiety? We walk through this for a second. We have to recognize it, embrace it, work through it. But if you realize, right, with the work through it part, there are all these messages that came up around this. All these messages going like, hey, like I may be doing this call today. I may be anxious about this call because I want to actually do a good job for you. My body's going, get ready. You're about to do a presentation. But there are these moments where our bodies may actually be telling us something around the line of like, hey, you're anxious because you're not good enough. You're anxious because you're a fraud. And then we have to spend that time and energy going like, actually, what are the messages really around us telling us? Because that will actually inform what we value. And here's more what I mean. When you get anxious, it is so important for you to sit here and go, what really is the message behind all this? I know I'm repeating myself a lot here, but let's pick one of these. Like, for instance, like let's go, if the message is, I'm not good enough, I'm not a good speaker, I'm not a good enough founder, I'm not a good enough leader, right? And you may have this moment because of this. Like, you might have this message when you're anxious going like, well, I'm anxious because I'm not good enough. Why? Well, maybe it's because my company isn't successful yet, or is not as successful as my friend. Or I may not be good enough because I'm not married. Or I may not be good enough because I'm not rich enough. Or I may be not good enough because I'm not funny enough. Or I may not be good enough because I'm not attractive enough. I would spend a lot of your time and energy going, what is this core message around you telling you that's causing you to have this anxiety? And let's deal with this. These are the 3 questions I would have you write down and ask yourself. Number 1, where do you get the most anxious and sad? We call these triggers. Where do you get the most anxious and sad? For me, well, actually, we'll get to the story in just a second. And then secondly, what's the core story behind it? And third, what does this say about what I value? So let's play this out. For instance, right? This is like this is truly the real example for me. When do I get the most anxious and sad? Well, for me, it's when I see other more successful founders. When I see someone who's a peer of mine who is more successful. Why is that? What's the core story behind it? It's that I'm not good enough. That I don't have the chops to go do this. That I'm not going to be successful enough, right? That I'm not like, but what does it say about what I value? And here's the key moment. What does it say about what I value is that I want to be successful, because if I don't, I won't be loved. That if I'm not successful, I won't be loved. And I think if I were you, I would spend so much of your time and energy doing exactly what we just talked about here. Where do you get the most anxious and sad? Do those moments as you go through your day. Go, why am I getting anxious? Cool. Feel it, embrace it, breathe in it. But go, what is it telling me? What is it telling me? What do I feel? Like, again, for me, it's, oh, I saw this other person who seems to be more successful than me. Like, that makes me anxious. Or I see this person like killing it. That's making me anxious. What's the core story? Well, that I'm not good enough. That I'm not good enough. And what does it say about what I value? That I want to be successful, right? With my company, or else I won't be loved. So I would, again, if I were you, I would spend a lot of time going like, what are those things? And then going back to this and going, what is the core story behind it? Are you anxious because you're helpless, not good enough, don't matter, unlovable, a fraud, or not safe? This is the final thing for today. The last thing you could do is this. Start modeling what it means to be a whole person and share that with your community. The best gift you can give your friends is becoming a whole person. Is doing this work where, number one, when you're anxious, you work through it, you breathe in it, you understand it. But number two, you're spending a lot of your time and energy going, what do I value as a person? What's the story I'm telling myself? And then how can I go and actually change that story so that I operate from a different value set? This is from one of my good friends who runs a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the States. And she just says, if you as an individual leading an organization don't value this work, this new way of thinking, there's no way that they can be transmitted to anyone else. It is a journey you have to decide to go on as an individual and how to determine to put it into practice. And that's my push to you all. If we're expecting our teams to be people that work through their anxiety and depression well, if we expect our families to do the same things, if we expect people in our community to show up in ways that are more whole, I think it requires each and every one of us as leaders to value this work, this new way of thinking, and realize that it's a journey that we're all going to have to go on and put it into practice every day of our lives. So with that, thank you so much. It was a true pleasure to do this talk today. And Cass, I'd love any thoughts you have, and then other questions from the group. I'd love that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pat. I think that sort of like help us, move the conversation from the idea that depression or, feeling anxious about things is a bad thing, and trying to convert that into some sort of source of strength. And I mean, my goal is to see how we can layer on top of that to look at the startup ecosystem and entrepreneurs and founders who feel like they're not good enough, particularly because we've seen in Nigeria, we've seen a lot of startups, raising capital here and there, becoming super successful. And there are other founders perhaps on the call or just in their own silos, building solutions that they think it's the next big thing, right? And while they feel like this is the next big thing, they see an announcement of another founder raising, shitload of capital.
Yes.
And then, suddenly they feel like, am I good enough? How do you combat that feeling with your own mandate as a founder to not get distracted? Because it's really, like you said, about focus. So how do you combat that, and perhaps maybe like examples of founders you've encountered in the past?
Cass, this is such a great question, right? Here's where it goes. It becomes, and this is actually, it's a really good point. If you find out yourself, your core story is, I'm not good enough, the question becomes then, is that true? Are you not good enough? Do you need something else? And frankly, the answer might be yes. The answer might not, maybe, hey, you actually need more education, or you need more mentorship, or you need more time, right? Or it's not the right time in the world. Like, but I first of all just start go, if you realize your core story is I'm not good enough, it's vitally important that you ask yourself, and you get around friends and colleagues who you're going like, I need to ask you like an honest question. Do you believe I'm not good enough for this? Do you believe it's not my time yet? Do you think I need to learn more to get to this place? And the answer might be yes. And that's one of the best pieces of knowledge you'll get, but at least you know it's true. I think the problem is with these core stories, so much of them come from a place in our childhood where someone told us you're not good enough, where someone told us you're unlovable, where someone told us you're not safe. And I think the question becomes like, are you telling yourself a message from childhood that's then sort of going here? Like, we're frankly, like so many people were abused. So they get in these moments where they're anxious and they're going, I'm not safe. But I'm going, is that something that happened from a childhood trauma, which is very real? Or are you in a place where you really aren't safe anymore? But I think it becomes these truth exercises you have to do as a person to go, if you find yourself telling yourself, I'm not good enough, great. Let's start there and go, is that true? Is that true? And why aren't you good enough? And answer the question. We'll go, well, why is that? And answer the question. That way you can really understand, if you aren't, then what do you need to actually get to the place where you are quote unquote good enough?
I think that sort of helps me with my next question. Still on the same theme of, am I good enough?
Yeah.
I think a lot of founders, sort of struggle with the imposter syndrome and the Jonas complex, right? Because a couple of years ago, I was doing a research around, mental health and sort of being audacious around ambition. And when you start on that journey, you feel like you're the best person, right? And then suddenly that process sort of shapes you into becoming someone else, because the responsibilities kind of varies now, the relationships varies, and what you have to give to sort of move into the next level varies. And then there is that challenge of asking, like, am I still me? I think the issue is a lot of people get lost in the personality of who they're becoming. And so they wonder, I think when they're alone, and I'll give you kind of like example in myself, it's that sort of like idea that for every time that you have to move up in building and sort of like challenging the status quo and challenging the assumptions, and you question, yourself, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I sure this is like what I should be doing? So how do founders move from, that early stage of just being entrepreneurs and then moving to now they're CEOs and they're running a business, and that requires a measure of like responsibilities, and that responsibility sort of create doubts and fears in them. How is that sort of like, how do we move from that feeling to a more productive feeling?
Yeah, I'm going to answer it a little different way than you were just asking me. I think about Mark Zuckerberg a lot, and I think about Mark Zuckerberg and going, I wonder if he has anxiety. And the honest answer is he probably has a ton of anxiety. I imagine he probably has a ton of anxiety. And let's talk about like why, right? Well, number one, like if you go to the thing, like probably early on in his 20s, he was going, I'm probably feeling like a fraud. I am 26 years old and I run a multi-billion-dollar company. He probably has every right to feel like he's a fraud, but he's doing this job, right? But I think about today, right? Like as he does these things, right? As he sort of builds this company, he is probably super anxious, right? Because he goes, if Facebook falls apart, will I matter anymore? Right? I imagine that's probably one of the core stories he's telling himself. Like, if Facebook falls apart.
I'm sorry, Pat, I think this is still like a fun fact to date, right? I still think,
yes.
Matt would be very much anxious and worried about where Facebook is going. Just to interject on that.
Yes. No, so just to kind of land the plane on that, do I believe any of us on the line will ever stop being anxious? No. Do I actually believe it's really bad for us to stop being anxious? I do. Do I believe anxiety is telling us every day information that is helping us be better founders? I do. And I think my question for all of you on the line today is, number one, are you telling yourself a repeated lie about where your value is placed? Are you telling yourself that you're not good enough or unlovable on a daily basis? That you need to work through and think about. But I think number two, on the short term, on that example, what are the anxieties telling you? Like, they may be telling you, hey, you actually need to get stuff done. Like, you're anxious because you actually need to get some more work done. Or you may be anxious or depressed because you're working too hard. And your body's going like literally, today I got up and it was like 7:30 this morning. It was an hour, 2 hours ago. And I felt myself like just like a touch of anxiety this morning as I was getting ready. And I'm like, oh, the reason is because it's been a pretty hard week. Like, it's been back-to-back calls, a good amount. I did a ton of like calls like this where I was talking to large audiences this week. I'm tired. And my body's telling me that. But at least it was me stopping and trying to hear my body instead of just working through it. I stopped and I went, okay, my body's telling me something. Let me hear it. And I know this weekend I need to make sure I'm resting a ton. That way I can show up really well on Monday. But it's all about me my anxiety was informing me of something that's going on in my body.
So does that mean then that anxiety could be considered as signal to when you need to sort of take a break? Because I mean, as a founder myself, there usually is that point where you get to and say, no, my bandwidth is exhausted, I can do more. But also, like, how do I recognize that this is a normal feeling? Because I think the real issue is sort of like not allowing that thought sink into your personality and sort of derail you from the focus that you want to go through. So do you mean to say, like, if we look at it frankly, anxiety is not a bad thing, right? And if we're saying anxiety is not a bad thing, which usually come with a panic attack, really. Like, I mean, it depends on the situation. Like, so 2 weeks ago when we had in Nigeria, for example, the shootings that happened at peaceful protesters, I was worried, like, we've built a lot of like infrastructure towards helping founders and all of that. Like, is this going to go down the drain because some very uncontrollable forces as sort of like, hamper on the peaceful protest that was going on? And how that affects me was totally different from, I'm sure, how it affected different people. So how do you sort of manage and control that feeling of saying, yo, am I on the right track? Or this is a totally mess up and I need to sort of move to something else? Like, how do you balance that panic attacks and anxiety, which is great, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, here's how I would answer that. The first thing I would say is, going back to those things of we just have to recognize what it is just telling us overall. Let's go to the protest, for example. I'm anxious. Okay, you feel it in your body. Let's go to that example. I feel in my body. I feel my palms sweating. I feel like I feel pressure in my chest. Okay, cool. So what do I need to do here? I need to just, that's the first thing of going, I recognize it in my body. Second thing is going, breathe. Right? And then you're going, right? And then you're sort of going, well, the last thing is going, well, what is this telling me? Well, it's probably telling me like, there's a real fear. Somebody who I know was attacked. And do I need to be worried for my life? Right? Or do I need to be worried for my family? Or do I need to be more careful? Right? Those are all things that the body is telling us to go and be anxious about. But I would say but I think one of the issues though with anxiety is that there's this really fun quote. Give me 1 second that I can, let me see if I can find this really quick. The unexamined life is one not worth living. I think like when you think about panic attack, what a panic attack typically does is you've now believed so many things and lies, like your body can't handle it anymore. And maybe you're even sort of pushing it down and going, no, like, I don't want to hear it. And the body is literally telling you, you need to pay attention to this or else we are going to take over your systems. So I think what I found is like, if founders stop, recognize it's happening, breathe, and then go, what is the message is telling me? It's usually telling you interesting things. I will be in meetings with new people and I will start feeling anxious and I'm going, what is my body telling me that I didn't recognize? And maybe telling me I can't trust this person who I'm talking with. It may be telling me like, hey, they're actually trying to do something shady around me, right? And maybe telling me actually like, oh, get ready because this could be a huge opportunity for you. But I think my point is, though, anxiety is always pointing you to something, but I would say a panic attack is now showing you maybe have ignored your anxiety for too long, or you're believing so many things, or you're putting so much pressure on you. Like you may be going, I won't be loved. I won't be loved unless this company is successful. And if that's the case, of course you're going to have a panic attack because you're going, I won't have any friends. My family won't be around me if my company's not successful anymore. Like that's scary as hell. So then I think we have to spend our time and energy going, how do we realize that it's not true? How do we go, I will be loved, even if my company fails? And that's where counseling may help, friends may help, but it's going back to those truth exercises and going, hey, what is anxiety really telling me, and is it true or not?
I also think like that is a very interesting perspective because we've seen founders who feel like the world doesn't understand them, and they're sort of like closed in, as you mentioned earlier, and they get to that point where they're not super productive, and at the same time they're kind of stuck with this idea of how do they move from one phase to the other. So from your own experience, like we're working with the entrepreneurs and all of that, how do you see, or maybe a better question would be, what solutions would you prefer, to founders, especially those at the early stage who are very ambitious, right? But at the same time, they lack the resources to scale. So when they see that sort of scalability happening around them, how not to lose focus, and staying grounded, recognizing the anxiety, recognizing the gift that comes with being in the phase of depression. And I really don't want to embrace the idea of depression very quickly, because there are obviously external factors that drive depression. But again, I think there is a school of thought that founders should see themselves as these pioneers or builders or creators, innovators and whatnot in the society. So how do they juggle, the idea of, trying to be very successful, but at the same time getting in touch with their own personality as who they are and who they really want to become? And I will say this because I know I spoke with you 2 days ago and you were running. Like, I really wish I could run very early in the morning. I have it on my to-do list, but somehow there's so many things that takes a whole of my time. So I'm wondering, like, for someone like you who's been able to decide and say, I'm going to focus on my family, I'm going to focus on my kids, and at the same time, I'm going to build an amazing, platform for entrepreneurs. How do you advise entrepreneurs to juggle that? And perhaps maybe some secret formulas that you've been able to combine over the years to figure out how it works for you, and maybe some learnings that we could take from that.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this in a few different ways. We're going to do some physiology for a second here, some brain chemistry here. But this is something many of you probably know, right? But there's a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is in here, the very front of your brain. And then there's something in the back of your brain called your amygdala, which is back here. It's near the brainstem. The thing about the prefrontal cortex is that is where your decision-making and your logic is, whereas the amygdala is where you're doing your fight, flight, or freeze, right back here. When over long periods of time, and especially if you're dealing with depression, a lot of times your brain functioning is mostly in the amygdala. And what it means is it's really, really difficult for you to think logically and be in the prefrontal cortex. So if you were going to figure out how to navigate tough situations, navigate where your company goes, it's actually vital you get away from the amygdala and you get into the prefrontal cortex. It's why, and I didn't go into this in detail in my talk today, But it's why when I feel anxiety, I recognize it, I see it's happening because I'm in the amygdala at the moment, and I stop and I breathe. Because literally, then my brain literally goes from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, and I'm now operating here. And I think what I see with founders is if they keep saying like, I don't matter, or I'm helpless, or I'm not good enough, right? They're operating in the amygdala, and they can't actually think strategically about what to do. They can't think logically. Another way of saying it is they're thinking on defense and they're not thinking on offense. And the more that you can get your brain to sort of be in that logical state, the non-emotional state, the prefrontal cortex, you will actually make better decisions and you'll actually be able to figure out what you want to do with your company. Another way of saying it is, operating the prefrontal cortex, you'll be able to understand what you value more. If you're constantly valuing your company as a way to make you feel loved, right? Every time your company feels like it's not going to be successful, you're going to go back into your amygdala. You're going to operate out of there. But if you tell yourself, no, even if my company is not successful, I will still be loved, right? Then you can automatically, you're staying much more in your prefrontal cortex where you're constantly going, okay, this happened today. That sucked. This person did this thing, but I'm okay as a human. So what can I go do to change my company? What can I do to sort of actually continue to grow this thing? Because let's be honest, right? If you choose to be a founder, every single day of your life, there's going to be bad news. Every single day of your life, there's going to be bad news. So my point is going like, it's not when it's going to happen, it's how often it's going to happen. I should say it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen and how often it's going to happen. And my push to you all is the more you can actually stay out of this place where you're making your company success, right, reliant on like setting up who you are as a person, and more about realizing that like you are going to be okay no matter what happens. You're going to be able to run a much better company because you're operating in the prefrontal cortex where you're thinking logically and on offense much more than being on defense.
So before we wrap up, are you saying that how entrepreneurs and founders might deal with the issue of mental awareness and wellness altogether is from deciding what they represent in the ecosystem? So
Yes.
Exactly. Like I'm trying to find the right way to say what I mean without sort of like contradicting the whole medical and biological facts that surrounds anxiety and depression. But what I understand as well is that if you're a founder building a company, you should expect failures. You should expect, a bunch of disappointment that would most likely trigger a level of your anxiety, trigger a level of your depression. But if you can address that and move forward to say, this is the goal, and I'm stuck with this goal for a while, maybe a couple of years, till I sort of make that happen. Do you think there's a difference between how a regular human, when I say regular human, someone just going about their day and going about their life, as opposed to how entrepreneurs would approach this issue? Because I think from the different entrepreneurs that I've sort of like engaged with, some of the ones that we're working with, I think the ones that have been open enough, they focused around the fact that they feel, is this what I'm supposed to be doing in my life? And the reason I'm more focused around those feelings is that, just personally, I feel like those feelings are what is holding a lot of people bound from doing the next big things, right? So
Yep.
Do you think there's a difference between how a normal person would approach this? Or is it because of the build of an entrepreneur that sort of like also incites this different thought process? Or it's just normal as being human beings altogether? And I think this is the last question from me. And I don't know if there's any other questions that others would like to ask. But as you do this, it would be great for you to also recommend a few resources, perhaps a few help, that'll make it useful for people to know that there is help, one, available, and two, it's not a stigmatizing situation for you to feel depressed or feel anxious about situation. It's just part of the construct of being an entrepreneur in a way. So I'd like for you to touch on those few points, and then we'll probably wrap up with that, with maybe personal experiences and things that you would like to share with our community as we close today's build.
Cool. Well, I'll answer this in 2 minutes, knowing we're just about out of time. I have 2 daughters. I have a Bella and I have Beatrice. There'll be times where I put the same exact food on the table to both of my kids, and let's say they may not like dinner. But my point is, like with Beatrice, I'll give her this dinner they don't like. She's like, Dad, I don't really like it. And with Bella, I'll give her the same dinner she doesn't like, and she'll look at me, she'll give me this really mean, she'll give me like a horrible look. She'll take the plate and she'll throw it, and she'll tell me she hates me. Right, and she's 4. My point though is this: I have the exact 2 same kids, and I have one kid that is much more attuned to stimuli than another kid. Same thing, same situation. They both hate the food, but one kid is like, with the negative stimuli that came her way, gets amped up a ton more than the other kid. That is how I feel like with founders. Founders are so much more attuned to the world, and so much more sensitive to the world's stimuli than I believe non-founders. I believe it's one of the reasons you are a founder. You have found problems in the world that need to be solved. And because of it, it's because you are so attuned, and because you feel things and you see things, that you're able to actually go and build these companies. It's one of your greatest gifts. But the problem is, it's also one of your greatest weaknesses, because you're so attuned, when you're in a helpless situation. When what you're doing doesn't matter. When somebody doesn't love you as you want to be loved. And it's because of that you feel so much more than the normal human being does. So my push to you all is going, you're all doing very normal things. You all are very, very normal founders. Kes, to your point, you all are people that react and feel stimuli much more than the normal person ever does. And that's one of the greatest gifts, and also too, something that will require you to constantly care about your anxiety and depression and what you value so much more than the normal human being, than the non-founder, just because of how you were created.
This is a very interesting session to digest, because you've shared a lot with us, Patrick. I think one of the key takeaway from this is that it starts with recognizing how we feel about the situation. I think it sounds very methodological in how you've broken things down to addressing the issue of mental health. But I do strongly agree with you that it boils down to addressing the situation, how we feel about it, embracing the situation, and figuring out how do we want to get out of this, because there is a huge responsibility that comes on us as entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs to move companies forward. And we can't afford to be in the backseat of how we feel if we don't confront them, so to speak. So I think this has been a very interesting conversation, Patrick. And I do want to say this on behalf of our listeners and all the people that have been able to join this call, that we've been able to get a few things that we've learned from this session. Thank you so much, so much for sharing your experiences and perspective on the issue of mental health. And we do believe that continuously given what we represent at CeedCap and also at the Global Accelerator Network in helping founders to build consciously, I would say, we would engage you subsequently. And we appreciate the time that you made. And for everyone else that would probably be interested in this conversation and resources and ways to sort of address the elephant in the room around mental health, I think CeedCap is very committed to ensuring that founders build with a 360 wellness perspective, and we'll be sharing enough content on our platform. Thank you so much, Nick. I'm sorry, Patrick, for the great conversation and honoring our invitation. We do look forward to the next series of Build, and we'll be sharing links with everyone on the call. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I don't know if you have any last word, Patrick, but thank you, everyone. We appreciate the time.
Cass, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
All right, awesome. So on that note, we come to the end of this week's Build session. Again, to reiterate why we host these sessions, we believe that it's important to enable founders across Africa and also across the world with the right frameworks, advice, mentoring, guides, to enable them build very sustainable and scalable businesses. And it doesn't just end at product development or fundraising. It also includes wellness of the founders. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be seeing you shortly. Thank you so much, Pat. And thank you so much, everyone on the CeedCap team, for making this happen. Have a wonderful rest of your day and the weekend. Bye.